Okay, so we roasted some pork in the oven just like we did in the beef brisket video, so check that one out if you haven't seen it. We went ahead and did a coarse shred on this, just pulled the pork apart and put it in the fridge overnight. And so now we're gonna complete the shredding process, remove any excess fat that we find in the process, and then move it over to here and mix it up with some Stubbs barbecue sauce and get it ready for freeze drying. So here we go. Okay, so we have taken the coarse pork shoulder, chilled in the refrigerator overnight, and we have made it a uniform pulled pork consistency. And when we started with these pork shoulders, we had a total of a little over 12 pounds, roasted them in the oven. It yielded 7 pounds total after pulling off visible fat when it was hot and draining the oil off. We ended up with 7 pounds. This is about 3.5 pounds of that pork shoulder, and we went through it a couple times just to try and get the size consistent, at least the largest pieces, consistent, and pulled out any obvious visible fat chunks. And also over here in this bowl, I'll move some so what you'll find is there are pieces that have plenty of meat in them, but they have excess fat in them. And I remove all this stuff too because, the interstitial fat on the pulled pork seems to freeze dry fine, but chunks of fat like this, where you can mold it and it just feels like you're squishing grease or something, that needs to come out. Or, well, I'll just say that I take it out and don't try to freeze dry it because the fats aren't going to freeze dry well. So, and I'd save some of those. There was, I don't know, quite a bit of that. So we're going to go ahead and mix in the barbecue sauce and get this on some trays and get it frozen. Okay, we are using Stubbs Original here, and this product is actually going out to some friends that are going backpacking in Utah, and hopefully they'll be able to capture some actual in the field video of their rehydration and use and taste testing of this product. But we're not going to spice it up like I would in the beef brisket, or I did in the beef brisket video, just because we'll have something more standard that more people in their group would probably enjoy. Anyway, so we're gonna get this mixed in. Okay, so that is about 3.5 pounds of pork shoulder and 2 bottles of Stubbs barbecue sauce. And it could use a little more, but that's fairly wet sauce. So we'll get this on some trays and get it in the freeze dryer. So we just want to try and get it even and not really above the height of the tray. Then it should freeze dry wonderfully. So we'll get the second tray loaded up here in a second. So this is half of the product, and we'll get them in the freezer and start a cycle. And then we've got the hard frozen pulled pork, barbecue pulled pork with barbecue sauce, all in one thing. So there's 2 trays of that, and the Harvest Right is already cool, so we're gonna start the cycle. And we'll come back when it's done. Okay, 19 hours, 39 minutes have passed. So let's take a look. And the blueberries. I mean, they taste fully freeze dried. And coup de grace, it's the pork. Barbecue pork, and it's all warm to the touch and it feels good. So I think that's probably done. We'll get that packaged up. Okay, so we got our 2 bags labeled for the barbecue pork, and you know, each of these really ought to make a meal. You know, if you just figure 4 ounces per person times 6 people, each bag ought to be a meal. Or if you're extra hungry, you could just do both bags and have a lot of barbecue pork. So 3.5 pounds. All right, let's get the oxygen absorbers in there and get the pork loaded. Actually, in reverse order. Get the pork loaded, then the oxygen absorbers, and get them sealed up. Okay, so this is one of the bags, and I'm using a 7 mil Mylar aluminum bag with a pleated bottom that stands up on its own, which is great for backpacking. So we're going to get some oxygen absorbers in here and get it sealed up, and then I'll probably write the net weights on there, and we'll talk a little bit about rehydration, but really this is going to be used in the field and hydrated, you know, ad hoc on the fly. So on to the sealing. Okay, the average weight of these bags is 23 grams. And the total weight of this bag of barbecue pork shoulder is 420 grams. And this one is 465 grams. So we'll take away 23 grams from each of these measurements. We'll write the net weight on the bag, and that by itself will give the person an idea, because there's approximately 1 3/4 pounds equivalent of freeze-dried barbecued pork in each one of these bags. And if you just start off with about 80% water of what was originally in there, then that's a good place to start for rehydrating. What I mean by that is if you convert this to grams and say this is the weight before it was freeze-dried, and you know the net weight of this one is 465 minus 23, then you can assuming 1 gram per cc of water or milliliter of water, you can know how many milliliters to put back in there if you could bring it back to 100% of the original volume. And this is a little bit of an estimate, so it could be that this is 1.8 and the other bag is 1.7, but it's approximately 1.75. And so if you took 80% of that ideal number and started with that volume of water, you know, that'll just help you from ending up with soup. So I'm gonna get those numbers written on here and we'll move on. So I did the math here. So we've got about 1 3/4 pounds equivalent pre-freeze drying. That works out to be 784 grams approximately equivalent pre-freeze drying. The net weight of the packaging is 442 grams. So that was 465 minus the weight of the bag. And then, so what that means is you should start out with about 10 ounces of water, or 275 milliliters, depending on how you're measuring, your product. And so it's just real easy to convert these things around, and you can always add more water. But if you started with, say, 20 ounces of water, it's just more difficult to get that out. You could obviously boil it, put this in a pot with hot water and reduce the liquid down to the consistency that you want. But I find it's always easier to start with less and then just add more to taste till it's the consistency that you want. So there you go. We're going to get the other bag labeled up, and this will be ready to hand off to our backpacking buddies. Just for kicks and to give you some idea about rehydration, we're going to rehydrate a little piece of this. So this is the product that we just bagged up for some backpacking. So you can see there's the texture of the pork is in there. It's freeze-dried with the barbecue sauce already. And I've weighed this. This weighs about 14 grams, so half an ounce is what that is. But I'm not real particular about, weighing the start weight and the end weight and then rehydrating, because, I've just made some hot water here in the Keurig, so this is not boiling per se. But in the field, I don't weigh all this stuff out. When you're backpacking, it's simpler is better. And so I find that if you just take your time, and of course, if we were on a stove, we would have even more flexibility, because you can reduce liquid. If you add a little bit too much, you can reduce it. If you add way too much, then you may end up just drinking soupy leftovers. And so that's not ideal. So it's already feels like the texture of pork already, just live in that amount of time. I mean, it's kind of amazing, really. And, this Harvest Right and this Premier pump in particular just work great. So we're going to let that go for just a minute, but, it's absorbing the liquid right away, which was my experience with the brisket as well. It just absolutely rehydrated wonderfully. And, we'll let that go for 5 minutes, and I'll come back to it and we'll check it. And then obviously, if you were on a camp stove or on your stove top, you could add a little heat to this and make it all go faster. So the 5 minutes is up. I haven't added any more water or any heat or anything to it. And hopefully you can see there, this looks just like barbecue pork ought to look. Texture-wise, you can see the texture in the meat. And so it looks like, pulled pork would be great on a sandwich or just in a bowl in the backcountry. Maybe with some side dishes, some baked beans or some rice, on top of rice even, would work. And so let's give it a taste. Yeah, it could probably go another minute or two, but it's pretty much there. And I would certainly eat it as is in the backcountry. And so, certainly this is a win in my book. One of the things that I would say is the color of the barbecue sauce is not quite as vibrant as when I put it in there. And the same thing occurred on the barbecue brisket. And so you could preserve some of the color if you added ascorbic acid, into the barbecue sauce before you mixed it in. Maybe that would help preserve some of the color, from presumably, I'm assuming it's just oxidation in the freeze-dry cycles that are causing it to be a little bit paler. But yeah, That's a win. And if you were putting this in number 10 cans and canning it for long-term storage, you wouldn't even break it up into pieces as small as I did to get it in the bags. So, yummy. That's for sure a win. So when you guys are thinking about rehydrating your dehydrated products, my suggestion is just always start off with less water than you think. If you have comments, leave them in the comments section. I try and get back to those promptly. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Make sure to ring the bell and select the option so that you get notifications. Also, if you want a little extra content, I am active on Snap and Instagram. And remember, whenever you can, get up, get out, live a little. See ya. Alright, so we got 2 silicone trays loaded up with the Bush's Sweet Heat baked beans, and we got 1 can per 6-slot tray. And so as serving sizes go, for backpacking, probably 2 of these blocks with some